morning, everyone. This is episode 34 of We Mortal Coils. I'm coming to you not live for y'all, live for me. It's Trevor here, hosting this episode. I am joined today by our special guest, Michael, as well as our two best pals, Bray and Stefan. We're doing quite well here. And we are here today to discuss a particular topic brought to us by Michael. It is about reason. It is about rationality. It is about some German. And with that, I will pass it off over to Michael and see if he can help us by building a platform of this topic, exactly why we're discussing it, where it's from, and then we'll go off from there. So, let's go ahead and do that. But first, if anyone has any questions or thoughts about this episode, feel free to post them down in the comment section down below. Send a like or a dislike. I don't think those things are recorded anymore, but if they are, then that's what they'll be. Then yeah, post something about how wild Bray's new background is. Is it AGI? We don't know. Is it fake? Is it fake news? We'll find out. And with that, Michael, please take it away.
Right. So I found this essay basically completely on accident, but it's written by a German philosopher named Wolfgang Welsh. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too badly. And his work is not really translated into the English-speaking sphere of things, it seems. Need to look into it more, but most of his work is originally, at least, in German. So he had kind of a heyday in the 90s, and he's still around. But this brief essay, I converted it to PDF. It came out to about 15 pages. Is kind of his excerpting of his own philosophy on an understanding of the words rationality and reason, and then defining them as like very specific terms that are connected to each other, but also very much their own things, where normally in like common speech we use those words almost interchangeably, right? So I thought it would be good for us to kind of like have something where we have a pre-read and then we discuss, interpretations on the topic, an understanding of the overall work, and then kind of any offshoot ideas we had with that. So to start out, I really wanted to make sure, especially for listeners, just so like if they don't want to read it, to give a general overview of the piece. And so the two parts I want to start with are his definition of rationality and then his definition of reason. And then once we get that, how those kind of fit into this microcosmology that he's concocted here for us to try and fit.
Sure.
Into our
I have
thinking.
one question for you, very short. Before we get into the real beef of it, the question is, if you wanted to give like a general idea of what this episode is, if I were to give it a name, it is something as simple as what is reason, what is rationality? Could you give it, if you were to really bird's eye view it? I'm doing this just as just an assistance to the listener.
Certainly. So I guess the idea here is these are ways that we move through the world, but they are kind of mental faculties, like ways that you think. And so it's structural. I would definitely say like differentiating reason and rationality, like splitting them out. You could say reason versus rationality. You could say reason and separately rationality.
Well, let's get started. So, according to Wolfgang, what is rationality? Start there.
So, I actually want to ping you guys for this because I have my own idea, but like I want to hear your ideas first as to how he kind of generally defined rationality, how he structured what he meant by that.
So I know he cites the is it Kant in the description of like rationality is not reason cannot describe an object or some sort of thing. It can only relay information about the methods of rationality. And so, as far as rationality concerns, I understand we have a lot of different versions, quote unquote, of rationality. And it is through reason that we elaborate on those methods of rationality. But in fact, the methods of rationality are the only way that we can actually describe or talk about objects. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure that was in.
I could be totally off base, right? But what I gathered from the author and what he's trying to say is that and my note here says uh, to sum it up, I think he's saying that rationality is being predictable. So to quote him, but to change it a little bit, there are different versions of rationality, but let's replace that word with predictability. And then if we did that, we could see what he's trying to say. Predictability among cognitive, moral, and aesthetic modes of thinking. So in other words, how could you be predictable in the way you think? How could you be predictable in the way you treat others? How could you be predictable in what you see, what you like, and what you hear aesthetically?
Right.
I love that, and I think that'll be a jumping off point for a future discussion point. But Trevor, if you had a take.
So having a take, I kind of want to just like put my thought in about the whole essay, like really briefly. It feels as if, or in reading the essay, he comes across a particular problem. Like the entire essay is in service to answering a particular issue happening right now. As he sees it, there's this traditional view of reason and of rationality, which are fundamentally not incoherent today, given current changes in the ways that we evaluate reality in terms of rationality. To set the playing field a little bit, we have to kind of explore what Wolfgang visualizes, how he encounters the world whenever he approaches this problem. What he sees is a myriad amount of rationalities, plural. Stefan just touched on them very well, and then a sort of reason, a meta reasoning that from which you then select various rationalities, or you engage with those rationalities. So to kind of list them out a little bit more, I have a list of 7 here, some little descriptions. Here we are. There's cognitive or scientific rationality, which is the pursuit of knowledge through empirical observation, which is usually what people think of, I think, usually whenever we think of rationality. But he also uses other forms of engaging with reality, of other ways of encountering as forms of rationality, like rationalities, such as aesthetic rationality, once again also brought up by Stefan, or the ability to critique art or literature. But there's also what you might call ethical or political rationality, or moral rationality. That is to say, how do you engage with moral implications or moral problems? It's really difficult to speak to moral or ethical problems from a perfectly scientific rationality. That would be one of the central arguments given by this essay, to say that there are a myriad rationalities with many different ways of visualizing, and each one has different answers, but also different ways of visualizing the problem entirely. For example, the scientific rationality kind of extends itself to cover everything, but at the same time, and kind of has this ability to ignore or completely supplant other rationalities. And those other rationalities have things to say about everything else as well. And basically, your ability to reason is your ability to select and sort of engage with. And the problem that Wolfgang sees in this essay is, the idea is right now, in the traditional view of reason, is that reason is this ordinate view, what he calls an Archimedean position, from which you look down and then select rationalities. It's the very top of the pyramid from which you engage with things.
Right, it's lateral.
Lateral. Yeah, that's what he uses. He uses the word vertical, lateral. It's a perfect way to say it. From which you then apply and select how exactly you wish to engage with the world, how you wish to encounter your life, or this moment, or this complex. But his basic view is that there is no such thing actually as an Archimedean position. There's no such thing as a true detachment. The things are constantly entangled. Yes?
Could you put Archimedean position in a like that is referential to a kind of analogy. So in plain words,
Plain words. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I
he's
should.
referring to a fulcrum point, which basically
Yes.
like some point of leverage, right? Something that you are sitting
Exactly. Yeah.
right.
It is an idealized, objective standpoint from which you can judge everything without entanglement, without
Mhm.
being affected by things. You just see things as they are. That's the Archimedean position. It comes from Archimedes, a famous quote of his where he said, "Give me a place to stand and I can move the world." Something to that effect. That may not be an exact
A long enough
quote.
lever
Yeah,
and a
yeah, long enough
fulcrum,
lever.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
and I
There
can
we
move
are.
the
They all
world.
know it. Very good.
Yeah.
All right, so essentially that's the Archimedean position. And the problem that Wolfgang sees is that there can be no such thing as in a position free of entanglement. You're always going to be in a paradigm. You're always going to be using a form of rationality, leveraging against others. There is no such thing as a truly disentangled position. Therefore, there can be no ordinate reason, even. There can be no ordinate position, uh, lateral position from which reason can affect everything. And that's where we begin. And that's what Wolfgang's essay is about, an attempt to recreate reason such that it can survive in this new cognitive paradigm that we're presently in, such as where everything is just representations. Yeah.
I will go ahead and put out what I see him defining very simply rationality and reason as, which to him reason is this connective. It's making associations. You are connecting dots on things purely and simply. It is the ability to traverse ideas by connecting them. And then with rationalities, he had an interesting point where he said that effectively rationalities are not built in service of I'm trying to remember which way he came at it. He either said that the principles of the rationalities are a post hoc, or either that or they're the core bit that everything is built around. I don't remember. I think he argued against that actually. He said it's like it comes from a holistic idea and then you build up the principles around that kind of vague idea in
Mhm.
order to give it a model or a rationality form. Is that I'm trying to remember.
I want to say I'm pretty sure that's how it was worded.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
reason is the connective, making connections between things, and then rationality is almost like this filter where you say, okay, I'm making all these connections. However, based on these set of principles that I operate or this model.
Let's have a very simple example, right? Especially for the listener.
Yeah.
This very complicated episode. You know what I mean?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And we're happy to be here and talk about it. And I hope that at least some of our listeners have the stamina to put up with it, right? But so we have a certain modality of thought, right? And so if we meet someone who was not part of that modality or had a different modality of thought, we might describe them as irrational.
Mhm.
That you see that's the easiest example you can think of. Whereas we have this idea of how people per se behave. People who behave in a different way would be irrational.
Mm-hmm. I really want to speak to that directly, like that specific point, because I think you've opened the door now to the real implications of this discussion. Like there are some very serious implications given. Once you read this essay, you kind of realize what the effects this could have on the, I guess you could say, the destiny of mankind or of humanity,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it really does have serious implications. So essentially, one of the main words that really worried me initially when I read this essay in the very first half is is the word Eurocentric, and this point of view that essentially what you would consider to be the part and parcel reason and rationality, the reason, the ordinate reason, and the scientific rationality, which you might those two things are called by some today in the humanities and in other places as the Eurocentric point of view, and are, I suppose you could say, imperializing themselves over other forms of rationality. and they try to give argument to other types of frameworks, such as, and they use the word indigenous frameworks or religious frameworks and that sort of thing. And that's a real concern to me because I definitely see the weight of the argument. Don't get me wrong, I don't personally believe in such a thing as an objective framework from which anyone can tether themselves. These are all just abstractions. But it does concern me that when we're in this environment, when we allow the entire plurality to play its game, which it necessarily must, we open up the possibility that people will throw out what is necessarily the impetus for civilization, or the level of profundity that has reached us in these last 200-300 years. This scientific seriousness, the scientific
Well,
method.
real quick.
Yeah.
So, like, one of the notes that I have from the first half, especially of the article. By the way, for anyone who goes on to read this, I followed the first half so much better than the second half. You know what I mean? You know, he Welsh uses a lot of, and it could be translation, right? But a lot of words that could be simplified.
Yes.
Right. I could definitely tell it wasn't a scientific paper, because it's like it was almost like, dude, you're trying to make this complicated. You know what I mean?
I completely
Whereas
agree.
you really need to start making it more simple. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I was able to get through it, but it was still hard. But anyway, the note that I have directly below the note that I just said earlier, and commenting on what Trevor's saying, it seems like Welsh, to summarize a lot of what he was saying, is saying paradigms have grown so distinct that they can manifest different answers to questions, and those answers may conflict.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Yes.
And so, like, just to give a personal example, to ground this to the personal, and to reel us back from the super abstract, right? I'm
No, that's
I'm
good.
dating
No, that's good.
I'm dating an artist. He and I like see very little on the same plane, right?
Oh, I see.
And because he shows me how to be more of an artist, I show him how to be more of a scientist, and we develop this common ground, and that's what keeps things interesting. Actually, is that we, at the end of the day, we're more similar than we are different.
Mm-hmm.
And so for anyone who's listening, by the way, if you're trying to date anybody, they say opposites attract. That's bull. All right. Like, opposites hook up, but they don't keep together. You know what I mean? But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that he and I see the world in very different ways. But at the end of the day, we see it more similar than different. And it's just that we have different modes of thought. Whereas I'm concerned with, like, this reason aspect of things all the time, he's concerned with aesthetic, and we have different answers to questions, and reaching some common ground. That's the fun of it,
Certainly.
Right.
You just opened a whole Pandora's box with that last sentence. I think is really interesting.
Well, because that's what Welsh is trying to say. This whole article is that, like, this transversal,
Yes.
entanglement, stuff. That's what we have to start working on.
Yes.
And I
so
think that's
so what?
too. Yo, go ahead, Trevor. I know you were already talking.
Oh, thanks. Well, I was going to say, so Stefan, what you had just said there in your last sentence, you said first you focus more on reason. Well, his mode is more on the aesthetic. Well, what Wolfgang, he visualizes it very differently in a very interesting way. It's not that you do reason, he does aesthetic. It's that reason is the mode from which you select multiple rationalities, and these are just two different forms of rationality.
Yeah, what I
He
meant to say was,
visualizes the landscape very differently in an interesting way. It's a bit like
have I lost you?
like writing his own rules, and so are you. It's a different way of encountering the system at large, and he views it as if that. And what you have here are just two different forms of rationality: aesthetic rationality versus scientific rationality.
That's what my internet glitched out a little bit. That's what I meant to say. But not per se reason, but scientific rationality.
Certainly. But I think that's really interesting, though, because it kind of reveals that there are multiple modes of actually engaging the entire problem itself. I mean, even the problem of
That have to
engaging
be.
the multitude of paradigms is itself a paradigm. It can only be a paradigm. There are many different ways to line up the pieces. It's a bit like playing systems science and trying to create a system from which to engage with the world. But when you do so, you necessarily create a paradigm, which is only one of myriad paradigms. Each one just produce predictable results at certain degrees. And that's the only way you can get at the fact of the matter, whichever one produces the most predictable results, to connect to what Stefan said. And Bray, I interrupted. If you have...
Oh, no, I only sought to sort of highlight the importance of sort of, what was going on in the conversation and return to that lateral illustration that I guess we sort of co-opted with with the author here, and that I think what we're trying to do is figure out a way to have some I almost like omni tool to like be right or correct or most correct in every scenario. Otherwise, we are in sort of running around like a chicken with our head cut off, like everything, making arbitrary decisions. Or and like in Stefan's case, you have two people who are almost like a camera. Like you are trying to perceive the world, and so you use a camera, which is the instrument of reason. And depending on which lens you have, and things will change about your opinions or way that you want to, like Michael said earlier, move through the world. And then I only sought to say it's even more complicated than just that, because just bear with the analogy. You can put different lenses on, but then there are different there are even further still.
Yeah, there are different focal lengths
Exactly.
within those lenses.
So it's incredibly complicated, and I think that's what's really pressing, like you said, Trevor, that makes this sort of
it's very
doom and gloomy. If you
it's very fruitfully growing. Like, it allows for many different layers of complexity that we can get into right now and have a very in-depth discussion. But it also pulls the floor out from under you, because the traditional view of the ordinate position of reason from which we select these points of view. And if you go to like the 19th century and like in the West, and you have this point of view of what we call today scientism, this idea that reason, and this is really what Wolfgang and also broader what our culture today is fighting against, and at least some aspects of it is. What you have in the 19th century is this view that we now call scientism, where essentially the idea was that reason is the ordinate grid, and then the proper way to visualize all forms of things, and generally all ways of encountering, is through the cognitive scientific rationality, and everything else should be subservient to it. And that leads to problems. Personally, I kind of expected.
Real
like
quick. Yeah, there you go. But so to capitalize on what Trevor's talking about, to hop in, as long as we're continuing this point, I know this, we kind of started somewhere and now we're a little somewhere else, but I thought that section 2A was interesting, right? And to read from my notes, what he was trying to say, in my opinion, was that we have whole systems of thought built on rejecting other systems of thought, right? So I really liked that for some reason. And I don't think that this is entirely true of every system of thought, but it is certainly the case of a lot of them, right? Now, that being said, I asked the question, is this a bad thing? And I said to myself, no, it just isn't. Building up principles make us better at what we do. You know what I mean? So I'm not convinced that this is a bad thing. Science, for example, is a process that leads to very incremental steps in gaining knowledge, but it's broken up here and there marginally, by seemingly marginally bigger jumps, like Einstein or Newton, for example, or Darwin, especially. And I don't know. It seems like the author is advocating for a unification of different paradigms, or maybe Welsh is advocating that, like, we have to step back, like take a step back. You know what I mean?
So one thing, somebody's tapping their foot, and it's really bothering me.
I hear that too. I thought maybe that was the cats. Yeah.
But
Please,
two,
Michael.
Yes, absolutely. So I think maybe we've said it before, but just to say, like the rationality of science is definitely like what you said earlier. It's a tool of predictability, right? And it's
Hmm.
very incremental because that's the best way to get the most predictability out of the system.
Hmm.
Um, and it's beautiful. It's like a laser beam. It just
Hmm. But like that's the thing. I have a lot to say about the second section in regards to like uh, reason and the scientific process and so on. But we'll
I
get there. We'll
Yeah,
get.
I'd like to spend a second talking about the problem at large. That is to say, what Wolfgang's trying to solve, and then like we keep on mentioning how he tries to solve it, and what he calls eventually transverse reason, which we haven't discussed or explained yet, which we need to do. Um,
yeah.
but I'd like to explore the problem first, and then from there, Michael, I'd like for you to explain to us what transverse reason is.
Okay.
So yeah. The problem at large, as Wolfgang sees it, is this plurality of rationalities and the personal failings of what you would of the ordinate reason, and how there can be no ordinate position from which reason can derive meaning and select with perfect disentanglement. And by disentangle or lack of entanglement, by that I mean that you're not still within the perspective of a particular lens, worldview, or rationality. You're not within one of those. You're perfectly disentangled and able to give a point. That would be the ordinate reason position. Uh, Due to the fact that you can no longer do that because everything is necessarily a paradigm in itself. From that point of view, everything becomes very pluralistic and everything becomes more or less equivalent because there's no pole from which to measure yourself and
Hmm.
measure and find bearing in your particular point of view right now. That goes back to what was said earlier. There is no Archimedean position. I suppose you could say that as essentially as a maxim of this entire episode. There is no Archimedean position.
Hmm.
That when that occurs, what you have is a civilization that has plural, many different ways of evaluating reality, and no select way of doing so. Uh, Continuously and ordinately, like everything doesn't come back and subserve underneath one. It's just all out there. And when that happens, you have discussions such as, or claims that are very concerning, such as one mentioned briefly, not made by Wolfgang, but mentioned as it is mentioned, that the current scientific rationality is a Western or Eurocentric point of view that reduces and is destroying other rationalities that should go up, which personally I find um, I'm sympathetic to, but also very concerned by that point. Specifically, I'm very empathetic because it's true. Scientific rationality, the that point of view and reason today does necessarily reduce everything by its point of view. I reduce a lot of things from that point of view. I reduce and simplify a lot of reality from that lens whenever I engage with reality from that point of view. And I can have a way of destroying those things, just like what Stefan said earlier. You have a way of thinking of people from different groups and cultures as irrational. And I'm empathetic to those people that are being called irrational. But at the exact same time, I'm very scared of this point of view. I'm very scared of the potential of labeling scientific rationality or rationalities as Eurocentric because there's a way of invalidating it when it is in fact the most important development in the history of humanity.
Hmm.
It's really quite an important thing. And if you label it and paint it in red in the same way that we paint in red other things that we consider evil from the West, which are evil, I think you allow for a lot of serious problems, and you allow for. I'm reminded a little bit of the decline and fall, not of the Roman Empire, but the decline and fall of the of what you might call the Islamic, or not Islamic, but the Turkish Empire and the Islamic civilizations that rose following first the Arab caliphs, followed by the like Turkish caliphs, and all those in between. They fell. The extreme scientific development in the Islamic civilization was quite ahead of what was occurring in Christendom in Europe for quite a
Hmm.
while. When there was a cultural pivot, a cultural development that occurred, where people took less interest in scientific development, it took less interest in development of stronger gunnery and weapons, or more focused on tradition. and didn't. That went really badly. Went really badly in the long run. Looking back now, I can point to the Crusades and how they and what came afterward, and what came after the period of invasions. It's very, very serious what we're currently discussing, and it does in fact have serious implications for all of not Western civilization, I would say civilization, where this discussion goes. And Michael, from that point, sorry, I got very hot, I got very winded there. Very, very sorry, but I wanted to bring
I
you
would,
back in.
I would just
Just-
like to say, like, we should resist every urge to be like the college freshman who reads a paper and thinks like, oh my goodness, this is the thing. Yeah, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, we should resist every urge like that.
Yeah.
Just a word of warning.
No need to be terribly ecstatic, but he is outlining basically like philosophically we've come to the conclusion that there is no ground truth about the way things are, and that the only baseline truths that we operate on are really just cultural and local. And the way that he's kind of saying that yes, reason used to be put in this Archimedean position, and he goes through the history of like how reason is considered, how it is belittled over time and like reduced from something, almost well, actually literally divine, to something that's less metaphysical, and then now he's relating it as simply a mental, like a way that your head can work in which you connect things. And so what he's saying is that rationality and reason are kind of two sides to the same coin, in that rationality allows for the traversal of conclusions about the world, and then did I say rationality or reason there? Reason allows you to traverse the different rationalities. So you can say, oh, right now I'm going to consider this painting in an aesthetic sense, but then I can and like how that affects my mood, or how the colors make my head feel, or whatever, abstract things like that. But then you can also consider it from a technical, what technique was this person using? I can see they did a bit of sponge work there. It looks like a sponge. That is some very like heavy gouache. Like, there's different ways of approaching objects within the world, and it is actually highly beneficial to have multiple rationalities or multiple models of the world at your disposal. And the way you
Right.
traverse that is by making connections, very simply. Just saying, I have a model about the world that could relate to this object, so let me consider it within that model. And then perhaps that reminds me of another way of considering it. And when you make these transitions, when you make these movements between your model of how you're considering the thing, that is what he is calling transversal reason.
Mhm.
Hmm.
That's what's so interesting to me about all of this, is that the more that you talk about it and the more you read it, to me it feels like you almost start falling into some sort of attempt at understanding like the human nature, I guess, or just like being as like a mammal instead of like a social creature, I guess. And I'm trying to articulate what I mean by that, and like trying to understand how to exist in the world alongside millions and millions of other people who are just like you, or rather, as Stefan would say, more alike than different. I keep thinking about, okay, if we're going to come up with some sort of singular structure that can help us define almost everything, how can we start from somewhere? We start from like a moral foundation and talk about like what we want as like a species, like the well-being of a species. But then what does that tell us about the nature of reality? It's like, well, then we need a scientific understanding to do something like that, because that's where we get all our answers in that. And the more I keep thinking about that, the more it seems like what Michael said is like we need all of them but we seem to have an issue defining some sort of solid compass, almost like by which to always like the Pirates of the Caribbean compass that always points in the direction of what you want. You know, it's like we just can't seem to have that. Or
His conclusion
at
is you
least that's
can't,
what'll be
right?
what'll be discussed in the proposed solution. Perhaps.
Certainly. You know, I'm reminded of. I feel as if we're looking for the beginning of the sheet music, so we can begin to play the song, like correctly and soundly. We're trying to find the foundation, and we never find the beginning of the sheet music. We just look back and back and back and back, and there's just many different. There's myriad ways of evaluating, and I think in so many words, Bray, you just perfectly defined that maxim. There is no Archimedean position. We're looking for one. We don't find one. We're looking for one. We don't find one. We're looking for one. Once again, we just don't find one. There are things you take in consideration when answering a problem, but there is no ultimate paradigm to consider. And then from there, you have the fundamental problem here, and that comes brings us now to this transverse reason, and it's described. The word he uses very often is dynamic. That's the word he uses over and over again when he thinks of transverse reason. And Michael, you defined it so well that I'm finding it difficult to speak to it because it's just defined well.
It's very simple.
I have a question.
It's very simple.
Yes, it is. It is. Please.
So, I mean, in my last note about the first half of it, you know, we're all agreeing that, you know, about transversal, you know, reasoning or you know, navigating between rationalities. That's all good. But what about systems of thought, I should say, that are falsified, right? Or ones that we no longer have, or like. How do we manage that?
Like religious rationalities, if I'm guessing?
I mean,
or even
that's just one of them.
phrenology could be a rationality. If you want to
that's
consider
what I'm trying to say.
Like, that's a beautiful example. Yes.
Or people who used to believe that air was like spent, and that's why it didn't light fires. You know what I mean? The phlogiston idea, or alchemy, or astrology.
Well,
it doesn't have to just be religion.
Here's what's strange about those things sometimes. There are sometimes you can have an incorrect viewpoint, but there still is juice in the squeeze. That is to say, there is still something you get out of that rationality. Is weirdly enough, there are some things that you can derive out of what we now today consider bad rationales.
Right, but Trevor, why don't we teach astrology in schools anymore?
Because it's not as good.
That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, like at the end of the day, we have to have at least some utilitarian aspect about this, where we're like, okay, this is not for us. It's not working.
Right. I mean, there's a difference between somebody. This is why it's probably part of the reason why in the back of all of our heads we have such a hunger for the scientific discipline and the scientific rationality, is because it can do something that none of the other ones can, which is as close as we can get in our faculties, determine what is actually true about reality. You know, with the scientific method, we have described so many different things about the universe, or perhaps to use earlier vocabulary, we have almost mastered the predictability aspect of certain aspects of the universe, to where we can say that we know certain things, to where we know that astrology, for example, is just BS. And that,
that's what I'm trying to say. Like, what happens when one school of thought falsifies the other so tremendously? You know what I mean? You know, so it's like I was literally just teaching my chemistry 1 students, in other words, sophomores, about the scientific process. And I never told them, I never even made the claim that this is some kind of objective truth, right? I just kept positing the idea that, of course, our species would make such a thing that would benefit us this tremendously.
Mm.
You know, and of course we're getting closer and closer to the truth, because that's the point. And of course we're trying to get what at the end of the day, that predictability, right?
I have a question. While we do have that whole point about there is no Archimedean position, it feels almost as if that is to say move laterally upwards to look down. There's none of that. But it does feel as if the way this conversation is going, that we can move laterally downwards. You could have a really shitty predictor. You have a really, really, really bad one in a way.
Well,
is that possible, or does it itself have to be entangled?
so let me untie something that you're all kind of tapping on, but you're not quite seeing. It's just predictability is necessarily like angling towards predictability, desiring predictability, considering predictability as like a foremost, is in itself part of a paradigm.
Yes, it is. Oh, that's a beautiful point.
Well,
Beautiful point.
That's very
It's not.
true.
I'm not saying that it is
Right.
bad or it's illegitimate. I'm saying like that is necessarily.
Certainly.
Well, what
Paradigmatic.
I'm positing is
reveal.
that it is a good thing, and necessarily has to
That's
be.
exactly that. Yeah, I was going to say it is necessarily tied to a moral paradigm in which
Yes.
we value our well-being above almost
consistency.
everything
But
else.
Yeah. You've shown its value, but that I think what Michael just did is reveal that it isn't an Archimedean position.
No,
it's just
it's
Oh,
not.
no.
And I tell my students every year without failure, you know, what can science tell you to do? And they tell me this, I say no. They tell me that, I say no. No matter how many answers they have, I say no. It's not true. Science can't tell you to do anything, right? It's just a process by which we understand what comes next if you do this. If you do X action, what is the predictable consequence Y? You know what I mean?
if we pull the rug out from under us here and remove predictability from it, and just really just try to just look at it without that whole predictability aspect, I find myself incapable of creating that rejection of astrology in relationship to astronomy. I find it a little difficult because I need
Well,
I need some sort of something or rather on
You
where
need
my
a
feet
measuring
are
stick
that I can
in order
push,
to
that I
say
can
whether
lift
or not-
off from and leverage. You know, I need
Yeah.
something on the ground beneath my feet in order to leverage a position.
And look, Trevor, what I'm trying to say is that, especially in the second half of this paper, you're more than welcome to do that, and you're more than welcome to go and live in caves, or
yeah, I was
Well,
about to
that's
say
that's the problem of
you
the
know?
paper. That's the issue because it allows for that now, and that's a serious problem because now you can have people argue, like saying that scientific rationality is just Western chauvinism, and that's a serious concern.
That's wrong. You know,
well,
it's just wrong.
From where do you?
Hey,
where is your Archimedean position?
I'm not trying to jump ahead or anything.
Please.
I'm not positing an Archimedean position. That's not. You can't have one. I mean, you know.
Yes.
So I mean, like I know it's a leap in logic or whatever, but for example, just to use a discovery about the universe, you know, we know that all frames of reference are valid. For example, right? We know that time, as we know it, is not this this immutable thing. For example, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that you can't have an Archimedean position. You just can't.
Yes.
And that's fine. There's no problem with that claim.
But
there's nothing.
how? Yes.
There's nothing wrong with
look,
But how could you say that it's wrong? How could you say anything is wrong
with
that
confidence.
one?
That's
the issue.
how. You know.
So it is
telling you.
necessary. It is necessary. It is supremely necessary to have a position in the world for most people because it's grounding. It is the thing that makes your life have meaning. It makes your life
Right.
make sense, and it allows you to
Look.
not feel like
That's
Look,
just
dead in the water.
Time out.
But that's not an
If we-
Archimedean
if we-
position.
another abstraction.
If
It's
I
just-
want
it's-
if we want to jump ahead a little bit, so we're now firmly in the second half of the paper. I feel
Yeah.
where we're talking about reason, where we're talking about, you know, is there a possibility that all of science is just Western chauvinism? I'll be the first one to say there is a possibility, right? But it is unlikely that it is Western chauvinism. Do you see what I mean?
Well,
like, and from my point of view, it's so unlikely that it would be absurd if it turned out to be. You see what I mean? Now, look, I love referencing Jurassic Park. Y'all know that, okay?
Yes.
Because that story's not about dinosaurs. It's about humans, all right? And Ian Malcolm is sitting there on his deathbed talking about how, like, science will eventually be replaced by a new paradigm. But that's the thing about science. If we find a new paradigm that works, science would be the first thing to suggest that if there's a new school of thought that produces more predictability in nature, we should take it. Right? We should just go ahead and take it. We should leave whatever else behind, right?
I'm not okay. I'm not going to reference it perfectly, but I do have a thought about this that I think is a little concerning. So I have a friend of mine at over at Berkeley who worked with this guy named Donald Hoffman, who's at UC Irvine. He's a cognitive scientist who has done some writing that's really far out, like really, really weird. Smart sounding fellow. I know he was on what's it called podcast? The the one with that guy from MIT, like the young Russian looking dude. What's his name? Either way. Oh, no, I lost
Lex?
Lex, yeah, Lex podcast, that one. Yeah, so Donald Hoffman, he was on that, and essentially he has this argument. He comes from it from a physics point of view, where he argues this interesting sort of almost panpsychism, where space and time are not real, and he uses like essentially I think quantum effects in order to make that argument.
Talking about holographic universe?
No, I don't remember
that's
that
a whole
word
other
being in the
thing.
essay.
Okay.
So I'm going to guess no, but maybe. But experience is, and just to reiterate, time and space are not real. Experience is, and one of the things that he lists in this essay, one of the very first sections, like section 2, he goes. Well, what he lists in there, which is really frightening, is that he gets into like the neural networks and like the ways that brains cognize, and he tries to make this argument of how the way that you engage with and create reference points, your point of view, the way that you visualize reality, and how you see time and you see space, is in no way directly corroborated by reality. Like it's this strange. It's only from his point of view, he uses basically our point of view. It's only a probability, an evolutionary probability, a utility, something that we reference quite often. But I think that's really concerning. It's sort of it unlatches us a little bit from even our own ability to even discuss problems, because it kind of flips on its head the whole notion of scientific rationality or any rationality, and may more or less reveal why we have a plurality and why we don't just keep on returning to the same state of affairs, and why there's a myriad different rationalities from which to engage with things, and why even ordinate the Archimedean position of reason as it was is not what it presently is in this transverse reason that is that we're now exploring now. I think
Sure.
I think that's really concerning. It kind of I'm trying to bring the neuroscience of it into it, and it's frightening. Like I'm reminded. I'm sorry, I'm being really long-winded, but I have a really interesting paper that I just remembered. It was really wild. So there was this guy. There were a series of people actually who had their corpus callosum split in their brain, preventing, for a large part, preventing a lot of communication between the left and right hemisphere. Michael, you may know about this.
This is a deeply uncomfortable, but yes, I'm aware.
Yes, it is. So basically, they got several people.
I think I saw a post about this literally yesterday.
There's a YouTube video about it called "You Are Too" by CGP Grey, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
very popular YouTube video.
You may have mentioned this on a really old episode of the podcast.
It's a damn good experiment. Yeah. It's a very frightening experiment. So they got these people, essentially a lot of them were epileptics, so to prevent the seizures from traveling across the brain, just abating them somewhat, they gave them a corpus callosum split. And these people had this strange phenomena where whenever they were walking at a grocery store, their right arm would reach in and grab some like a granola bar and put it into their grocery bag without them wanting it whatsoever. It was just like this, and they'd have to reach out and put it back, and their hand would grab it again. It was a strange effect. Now, here's the experiment. That's not the experiment. Here's what they did. They would put on a pair of goggles, an apparatus over their eyes that would split their vision like this, where like their left eye could only see everything on the left, the right eye could only see everything on the right. They sat them in a room with the guy in a lab coat and put in front of them a table. On the left side of the table, with like a little line to distinctly define where the eyes are, so they know exactly what this person can and cannot see. Everything on the left can only be seen by the left eye. Everything on the right can only be seen on the right eye. On the left would be a terminal, if I remember correctly. The left would be a terminal, which would display text. On the right would be items, just like a ball and a square and a Rubik's Cube, that sort of thing. And the little terminal then would come up and say, pick up the red ball. And this person, where only their left eye could see that terminal and their right eye could see the ball, they would pick up the ball with their right hand and look at it. And then the guy in the lab coat would turn to this person and ask, and this is the scary thing. They would ask this person, hey, why did you pick up that red ball? With the four of us know, it's said to on the terminal. This person would look at the red ball and go, I've always liked the color red.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason they gave. Completely arbitrary. They came up with the reason.
Literally make something up on the fly.
They're perfectly convinced by it. They think that that's the reason why they grabbed the red ball. Horrifying implications that affects this entire episode.
And I wonder if that was ethical, right?
What?
I wonder if separating their hemispheres was ethical.
The core excuse, of course, was that it helped them in a medical way first.
I know.
Yeah.
And of course they had to have signed off on it.
Just like those vaults are going to help us survive.
Yeah, really.
The amount
So let me just like place down what I'm trying to say, right? So I'll just read it start to finish, my note about like, I'm trying to think which one, because we already talked about the godlike or platonic idea of reason that has been like that we all understand that that's not true. Okay, we all understand that there's not some perfect thought cube out there from which all other cubes are derived. Like, that's silly. That we know that. Okay, there's no Archimedean, place that we can, go to all these rationalities and with perfect symmetry and blah blah blah. Like, we understand that, and we agree on that. So I say, as my last note on this whole thing, there's a part in section 7 that refers to the idea that reason is not shared among all of our cousin humans in the same way. I fundamentally disagree with that. Why would I assume the other cultures of human know less than me? The assumption is that we know different things, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, I must assume that other humans are as capable as me. Let me repeat that other humans are as capable as me. In other words, they could teach me their paradigm, okay, or their rationality, and I could teach them mine. Okay? What's more, if we can find one objective counterexample, it would suggest a problem in Welsh's kind of like argument here. And look, I might be strawmanning here, like real hard, okay? But I don't think I am. One second. So if we can find a counterexample, it would suggest a problem in Welsh's argument. I posit that all cultures of human are trying to ultimately find a way to use energy in some way. Just because this essay suggests that we don't all arrive at the same exact laws of thermodynamics doesn't mean we and even our cousin creatures on this earth aren't beholden to the way that the universe works.
Right.
So you're talking about...
And just a quick note, I think that's part of what I was trying to pry out of my own mind earlier, was like... I
knew Bray would be on the same page with
resorting
me.
to that sort of natural being, and like there's at least some, even if we find ourselves in some polygon, we don't know how many corners or how many lines there are in this world. It's like the scientific paradigm or the scientific rationality allows us to always find one corner in that shape that we don't know, and we can fall back to it and go, oh, at least from here I can draw some sort of lines from here. There's at least something I know from this corner.
But before we say anything else, before we hear anything against what I'm trying to say and maybe what Bray's trying to say, let's look at two examples. Okay, the Judeo-Christian religion suggests that we live in hunger we live in turmoil, and we live in a time or place of hard existence by the sweat of our brow because we condemned ourselves in the garden. Okay?
Mhm.
In other words, it's a myth trying to tell its constituents, you live in turmoil because it's your fault. Okay? Well, a second example would be, as a scientist, I know that we have to live in turmoil because of the laws of thermodynamics. Two very different modalities of thought. We could all
Mhm.
agree on that. That lead to the same conclusion, and an ineffable conclusion, because the universe works this way.
And yet
Well,
have different implications across the other rationalities.
Yes.
you could almost wonder. I have several thoughts, but the first one I'd say about thermodynamics. You could almost wonder if the Christian precept of it being of things falling apart and all that is derived from the thing from which the law of thermodynamics is derived, or it could also be the other way
That's
around,
exactly
where
what
we
we're saying,
exist.
Trevor.
Mhm.
Well, it could also be the other way around, where we exist in an ecosystem, we here today in 2024, based on Christian precepts which existed before us. So therefore, the
Right.
laws of thermodynamics come from a Christian worldview, and that's the reason why we
No,
frame the universe
false.
in that reference.
So
Come
look,
on.
no,
Well, you
Trevor,
can
Trevor.
go from it from either way.
No,
I
you
disagree.
can't. No, you can't. Look. This
Yes.
is why I said this the way I did. Just because the essay suggests that we don't arrive at the same laws of thermodynamics doesn't mean that we and our fellow creatures on this earth. In other words, it's not a human concern. Every organism on this
Mhm.
earth has to contend with the way this universe works. Just because we call it Satan's interference with the garden, or just because we call it the first law and zeroth laws of thermodynamics,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. It's just a way of looking at it.
Yes,
Mhm.
Okay.
I agree with you. I don't actually support that second point.
I know you
yeah.
don't, but,
But-
I'm trying to vehemently
slam the
disagree
door
with
on
it,
Yeah,
because it's like
certainly.
that is not that
Yeah.
is not
Right.
a thought that I would welcome.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Very fair. I will say, I do have one thought. So way back when, at the very beginning of your assertion of your point, you had mentioned something like all civilizations or all peoples are essentially trying to express energy, or something to that effect.
Use it.
Use
is
energy.
it is the fundamental currency of the
Now
universe.
it reminds me of Civilization and Its Discontents or something by Sigmund Freud. He wrote a book, I think, was very similar assertion. Um, that feels to me like a bit. It's a very, very, very good ordinate view to view everything, but it is another. But like, I can't find anywhere where that's not true. I can't possibly think of a single people's or a single place, a single time where that's not true. It's a very good way of evaluating, but it's still, to me, when I hear that, it's still an attempt at an Archimedean position in which to evaluate everything.
No,
It kind of,
it's just an observation. It's
Right.
literally not a position.
oh, so you don't use it for anything. It's just an observation.
No,
I see.
no.
It's
Yeah.
literally an observation.
Which is the
Mm.
same thing again, and I love that the continued conversation continues to help me elucidate like whatever I'm trying to pry
I
out
really
of
want to
here.
hear from you, Bray.
me
But
too.
it's these. I don't know. I'm iffy about the use of the word brute fact, but
that sounds weird.
But it's
Bottom
these
line.
bottom line observations that we can make. Going back to the moral thing, it's like people are here. Like the reason all four of us are here, and everybody else, every other living thing that is here on pure observation, is due to the fact that at least them or someone else cares enough about their well-being to ensure its continued, being, so to speak.
Mhm.
People who do not care about their own well-being or the well-being of other people, we have observed, do not stick around very long.
Mhm.
And so, and there's something else. I don't know that I really want to go there, but there's something else to be said about sort of the innate feelings that we have, both for something like well-being, like I want to be with. These are the sort of concrete foundations that we would start with when trying to create a moral framework. Like, well, is health generally preferable to sickness? Probably. Is pleasure generally preferable to
Hey,
pain? Of
Bray,
course.
you could bend over backwards and just say possibly.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right. But these are just sort of these ground level observations that I think contribute to trying to, again, put ourselves in a position that we can, I don't know, comprehend this attempt at unifying the human psyche, or the global goal, I guess. There's just so much going on.
This is really hard. We're really like trying to grab a hold of something here, but
I
I feel
think
as
I
if
think Trevor, I think Michael's wanted to say something for
Yeah,
quite
Michael.
I
some
think so
time.
too, Michael. If you have something, please.
So
But
I'm
Please.
simply trying to locate the jumping off point within the text for the discussion of,
right,
and I believe it was essentially a beef with. He says something along the lines of, there is truly no common core to how people
right.
approach the world that can be found, other than what he's saying is this core nugget of reason, which is just a mental faculty of connecting things.
Mhm.
But you're arguing, I believe, on a physical ground that you could say the motivations of people, and therefore, like, one of their core presumptions about how to form rationalities and ways of moving about the world is like the manipulation of energy.
So I guess a better way to sum up my argument, right? And I was just looking for a counterexample with
Mhm.
the expenditure of energy, for example. Okay.
Yeah,
A better way to wrap up what I think me and Bray and myself are trying to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bray, is real simple. It is fundamentally true that you and I do not possess the same thoughts. Okay? It's fundamentally true that you and I don't possess the same uh, connections and
sure.
so on. Yeah, all that's true. And you're shaking your head now because it's a useless point to bring up. That's what I'm trying to say. It's ultimately useless, right? What is useful is to find the things that we do share.
Mhm.
Right.
That's what I'm
Yes.
and so look, the very last paragraph, reason has thus become a perilous faculty without firm ground, without a net, without ultimate security. This is the general air of his section 7, leading us in a historical context to reveal that there is no Archimedean, position, and that's fine. What I'm trying to say is that that's not only fine, it's true.
Mhm.
But at the same time, we should dwell on what is useful.
Mhm.
Just because we do not understand things the same way doesn't mean that we can't per se arrive to the same conclusions, perhaps,
Yes.
or are beholden to the same rules.
If I
To suggest anything else would
Mhm.
be egregiously solipsistic.
So if I were to understand you correctly, I want to hear like a
We'll
yes
say
or
it
a
5
no.
different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, see if I'll say it back to you. See if
False
I'm saying
dichotomy,
it right. Oh,
No, you're fine.
we're
Go
on
ahead.
our way. All right. So what I'm trying to if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is there is no Archimedean position. There is no ordinate from which we can derive. However, you should do this. You should, like, as a formal bit
Well,
of
that,
as an informal bit of
okay.
advice.
No,
That,
I'm saying
Because
I'm just saying that we can observe.
if it isn't what the reason why I say this is if it isn't a friendly piece of advice after the Archimedean position, then it is an attempt to make an Archimedean position. Like, what if you're not giving it as just a piece of just, hey, it would be cool if you did this, just like a piece of friendly advice.
So
Instead,
that
saying that this is the grid from which we can organize everything, then
right.
you are establishing an Archimedean position.
That's what I would tell you. That's what I would tell anyone here. That's what I would tell my friends or my students.
Mhm.
Friendly advice after this right? This is the world you inhabit and the people that are in it, and you should probably participate in this way, right?
Certainly.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to suggest is that fundamentally, and I'm bending a lot here, right? Fundamentally, every human can observe what every other human can.
In principle, yes.
Yes. And that has to be the assumption. If it's not the assumption, then we have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think part of that is just in a nutshell is understanding that there are capabilities by which we are all, or there are things that we are all capable of achieving. Example, understanding things about the universe, understanding things about ourselves and our motivations, whether that's to be well or to have meaning in a life. And we find those across everyone. Those people that don't have them don't exist, at least not very long. And so
and at the end of the day, some strategies are better than others.
Yes, some strategies for meeting the desires that we observe across
And there's
the
some
globe.
very common desires. There's some very common
Right.
core desires that most people have. The grand majority.
And I suppose the utilitarians in us all are saying, how can we best meet the needs of the most people? And that is by developing moral frameworks that serve a large multitude of people, and by knowing more about what is actually true about reality as opposed to what is false, because we observe, just like everything else, that the more true things we know, the more well we are in relation to, the outer world.
So here's one thought that I had towards what Stefan said earlier about rationality and in its place, and it's how it's not a Western chauvinism. So one thing I would say to that is when I think of the common rationality, the kind that we often think about whenever we say rationality, like the scientific sort of rationality. So that sort of scientific, well, not sort of, that scientific method, the one where we apply change and we look at it, you can more or less find its beginnings at a certain point. And I think that's interesting. I forget if I think it was Galileo. It was either Kepler or Galileo did this experiment where he took a ball and rolled it and saw how far it would go from a rolling point from a different position and height, and recorded.
I forget.
Yeah. It was
wasn't it Galileo dropping balls off the Tower of Pisa or something?
This one, I know which one.
Yes.
Trevor's talking about.
You're talking about a specific
and for some reason, Tycho Brahe is coming into my head for that experiment.
It's very he's adjacent. He's very near.
Yeah,
this,
it doesn't matter.
Early whoever did it. It was from that wellspring that you would see the eventual development of this methodology, the scientific method. Like people going, instead of doing the Aristotelian thing of just trying to cognize into existence a reality, trying to say that, well, this one's heavier, it'll fall faster or something. Instead, looking at the evidence and then creating models based upon that evidence.
See, this is what I'm talking about.
Well, that's the problem. I think I just revealed the issue.
Let me explain.
Problem. Let me explain, because I do think it is a problem. Well, hear me out. Here's the issue. So the issue is, so that is introduced in that time period, and then from that you see an explosion of work and things done that lead to the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and what we have today. Everything we have today. How I communicate to you today. We have it, and the wellspring more or less begins around there, in its wealth. So if it more or less begins there, Michael, you're laughing. I'd love to hear if you think I'm wrong about this, because I could be. I'm a little worried.
It's a very cogent point, but it is an arbitrary. People fundamentally have the capacity to screw around and find out.
That's fair.
Trial and error.
So
it's when you formalize it that it becomes extremely powerful.
Yeah. So it's the formalizing of it, and I'm trying to, and I may be failing, and I want to hear what you think. I'm trying to say that the formalizing took place at a particular time period, in a particular place, at a particular point, and then from that you have what we have now, and due to that point, it is more or less a Western chauvinism as it comes over and then finds itself in other places. I'm not
No, I
saying
don't
that
think
that's a bad thing, but I am saying it is a thing.
so. I want
Mhm.
to pick apart two things there. No, I don't think that the origin is incidental to just that. In the same way that Wolfgang argues that all rationalities necessarily come from other rationalities recombining,
Mhm.
all
Mhm.
models of the world are built on other models of the world, correcting them or arguing
Ju-
for
Just
them
as
in a different
just
way.
as all cognition comes from humans,
Mhm.
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
So
like that point never would have happened had caveman not gone, ooh, rock fall when drop.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
but I also want to approach this is like a game of telephone here, but when you say Western chauvinism and this the rationality and reason, and I can't tell if this is coming from a think piece where somebody's arguing about the colonialistic attitudes and the propaganda that push science in a certain flavor of propaganda as like kind of the hammer for everything, and therefore whatever you're doing is obviously got to change immediately, and we're taking over and we're going to make your place better because we're
Ah,
reshaping it in the way that we are. That seems like what that might be related to, but I have no idea.
Well, okay, Michael, real quick. Let's relate that to the very last thing Welsh says. Okay, let me find it. Let's see.
Because I don't think Welsh covers.
The abandonment of
no, he
reason,
does not. Mhm.
the abandonment of reason in favor of of a multitude of rationalities. It seeks. Hold on a minute. What am I trying to say here? Um, this is the paragraph that begins, reason has thus become a perilous faculty, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this spirit, the concept of transversal reason sets itself against both the backwards-facing hubris of reason, a repeated insinuation of autonomous principled reason, and against the present-day defeatism, the abandonment of reason in favor of a multitude of rationalities.
Mhm.
It seeks to lead away out of this double cul-de-sac. Okay, so
That is a
you
long sentence.
I know,
Yes,
I know,
yes, a lot of it
but
is.
look, Michael, what you were just saying, right,
Yes.
is that this is literally what I teach in my classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, science cannot tell you not to go rape, pillage, and exploit the indigenous population of a far off people.
Mhm.
It just can't. In other words, it was people's problems and
Yes.
foibles
Mhm.
that spoiled that. In other words, they thought, well, we came up with this scientific reasoning first, so that means we can just kind of put our dick wherever we want it. False, wrong.
Yes.
Agreeing with his final
Mhm.
assertion that we need to have a multitude of rationalities. That's a good thing. We have to be able to understand that, and this is what I'm saying against what Trevor's saying. Science is not Western chauvinistic. Science belongs to everybody.
It
Belongs
does. Yeah.
to the human race.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, and like you just said, at the end of the day, whatever we call it, some version of trial and error is going to take place.
Certainly.
And get us where we've gotten.
So I would say to both Michael and Stefan, what y'all have been saying. I just want to point in. So when these guys come in with their swinging, dick energy and just try to forcibly dominate other parts of the world, and they come in and do things like through like their superior rationality from their point of view, through everything else, we're going to come in and dominate still resources and force you to live differently, such as the Aboriginals in Australia, everyone in India. Pretty much just
South America,
pretty much
so on
the
and
entire.
on.
You can go wherever you like.
Mhm.
Wherever you like, you're going to find it. So I would say that those are two distinct things that I can point out here. The act of domination, the excuse to go off and do those sorts of things. That's one aspect of it, but that's not the aspect that I was touching on. I was touching on the actual state of the matter, the actual act and methodology of trial and error, the very strict procedure that leads towards. I'm describing the scientific method.
Yeah.
The actual scientific method is itself a derived from here, and then
That's what I'm
finds
trying to
itself.
suggest, Trevor. Like the orangutan can trial and error. Like it can't be a human-centered thing. It just can't be. We've literally observed chimps and orangutans and so on that can do these things without any human intervention.
You're totally correct, but it's the idea. It's the idea that Aristotle was wrong, that you can't just cognize and find yourself with a solution. You have to base your modeling on the evidence, full stop. It's everything else is subservient to it when you want to gather knowledge about the physical world. That's an idea, and that's a profound idea. That's an idea that welled up from one particular area. And my point is that when that idea welled up, it changed the world in that instant. Everything, you can almost call it that's the real before and after Common Era, that point.
But Trevor, this
when
has
that
to do
happens,
with logic. It has less to do with science and more to do with logic. Like I literally just got done explaining to my students, because it's the start of it's so weird how well this tracks, right, with what I'm doing in my daily life. But so these students come to me in Chemistry 1, and I explain to them that up until this point, they probably have not been exposed to science in the way that it's really supposed to be done. Okay? And I'm here to tell them, what we're up to. All right? So because we call it the scientific method or the scientific process does not matter. Okay, we can call it whatever we like. But at the end of the day, what is the method trying to do? It's trying to falsify a thing, right?
Mhm.
It's trying to prove something wrong. Okay, in other words, where do we get all of these really bad modalities of thought? And I say really bad with confidence. Okay, like I said earlier,
Right.
we get these really bad modalities of thought from trying to prove something true. That has to do with logic. It doesn't have to do with the scientific process.
So
It has to do with
isn't
logic.
that Popper? Yeah.
It is Popper, Karl Popper.
Yeah.
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 But
So what you're describing is a particular rationality.
there's no way to engage with this. Like you could. That's literally
I
the
don't think-
definition of an unfalsifiable claim. Every time that I suggest something, the goalpost moves. That's what I'm trying to suggest is wrong with Welsh's problem. I guess what I'm trying to suggest Welsh's problem is here. It doesn't. It just simply doesn't compute. I mean, it's not that I'm just some Luddite of the scientific world. Okay, that's not what's happening.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like I say, we're trying to prove something false.
Yes.
If the scientific process could prove, like, if it were possible to prove the scientific method is false, so to speak, we would have done it.
Mm-hmm. And that would be the new scientific method. So I would just say to all of this is that you're totally correct in your central assertion that it is a very profound what we're currently doing. This thing that's falsifiable, Karl Popper and all the rest. This method, this scientific method, is to me the most powerful thing you could possibly use to engage with this world. Very powerful, very powerful. But at the exact same time, the way I disagree with you is that I would also state that it is a series of thoughts that form into this methodology that took time to create and that led us to this state of affairs. We had to reject this Aristotelian idea that you can just use your mind and your own barren reason to understand the world. You have to use evidence. You have to use physical phenomena to build your model. You have to follow in a particular direction. You have to have a hypothesis.
The way I say it is that no amount of meditation will allow you to see the laws of the universe. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The evidence it's evidence or nothing.
Exactly. And what I'm saying is that was a cogent argument that developed over time, and in so doing, it is a idea, something thrown into the world that developed and intertwined and built over time. It's not a wellspring from which everything else comes from. It is a rationality that's surfaced along with other rationalities that have surfaced around the entire world. I think it's the best one. But that doesn't mean that it's not
a lot of problems.
I think
I'm having a lot of problems. Go on.
No, for navigating a lot of problems.
Oh, no,
I don't think
if I am, but let me know.
I think that we're still dismissing some very big observations
Please.
And facts about the universe, things that are not in dispute. Okay?
Mhm.
So, for example, if the universe were so set up to where we could have an infinite number, or let's say an unlimited number of humans, right? And then those unlimited number of humans could form into cohorts or whatever you want to call them and explore every idea, right? Then what you're saying would be true. Then, in other words, all of these disparate and differentiated modalities and all that, all great and grand.
Mhm.
And they would have different names for things and different conclusions and so on. Okay, but what we're forgetting is that these systems that we're talking about still exist in the universe that operates by some rule,
Mhm.
right? Say energy. Okay,
Mm.
like the expenditure of energy and how we get it and so on. So we do not have an indefinite number of humans, and we don't have an indefinite amount of time.
Mhm.
So, if we take that into consideration, I'm not trying to argue that you know the scientific process is the end all be all. I'm trying
Mhm.
to argue that
All
it can't.
rationalities matter.
I don't know. I don't know.
What I would say to that is once again I agree with you. This assertion you've just now made. I also agree with that. I'm also just pointing, like, that is to say, like, if I understand what you just said is like the world punishes you and you have to adjust and meet the world, meet its demands. You can't just believe that this, that, and the other thing. I can't just believe that there is no giant cavern directly behind my feet as I walk backwards. If I'm at the Grand Canyon and I think I could just walk backwards and have a fun day, that's just not how
Well,
it's going to
to
go.
say that we must
You have to change your rationalities in order to actually fit and rivet into your thrownness, your place in the world. You have to adjust in that way.
So
I completely agree with you.
encapsulate what you disagree with
What
one
I
more
disagree
time.
with. What I disagree with is
In
the
simple terms.
yes. What I disagree with is the notion that this way of looking at the world, scientific method, is not itself just one of myriad rationalities. And this particular rationality welled up in a particular time in Europe and eventually would well spring out and then affect the rest of the world. That idea, and just to open it up a little bit, once that Aristotle was wrong. You can't just use your pure mind. You have to use evidence to then build models, and you have to follow a very specific methodology. Use things such as theories and hypotheses, that sort of thing. That notion well springed up out of Europe to then dominate amongst many other things that came to come out of Europe. That perspective became ordinate over many things, including over the Aboriginals in Australia and including
but that's what
places
I'm
like India.
Okay, so that's what I want to suggest, is that this is not some European idea. All the Europeans did was refine an idea that was
Mhm.
already there. Okay,
it
like
had
I
the
said,
capability of coming from anywhere,
yeah, it had the
even from
capability
Well, yeah, of course they have the
orangutan.
capability of
That's what
coming
I'm
from
trying to say.
yeah.
So, like, if it
Maybe
can
not an
come from
orangutan, but
it,
well,
so
please.
so like, okay, let
You're
me.
almost making it sound transcendental, though, when you say it like that.
I'm trying to make it not transcendental. I'm trying to say that it's the best way, period. But I do think it came from somewhere, and I do think we could point out where it came from in a particular time. And I think that's the distinction between you and I. I think that's the difference.
It certainly came from somewhere, but the baggage that comes with it coming from somewhere is not in any way inherent
Harmful to it.
the
Yeah.
actual
Oh
rationality.
yeah, I'm not trying. Yes, I completely agree. I'm not trying to
Okay,
throw
yeah.
away that old phrase. I'm not trying to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. Call it Western chauvinism and throw it out. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to do the exact opposite. I'm trying to
Okay.
point out and say that it is a Western chauvinism, and we need to be, in a sense, and we need to be aware of that as it does what it needs to do.
Yeah,
and that is
sure.
dominate
fundamental
over
to
the world.
science. That's fundamental to science, is to acknowledge biases.
Yes. So what I'm trying to say is we need to acknowledge the fact that it's a Western chauvinism because it well springs out and goes around. But we also need to acknowledge the fact that it is also as a matter, it's just a really, really, really good method of evaluating the world. And we don't do the Inuits a disservice by teaching them about it. It's not us promulgating Western ideals and showing it. It is, but it's also a good thing.
But
It is Western.
I
It is
really don't like that. So what I'm trying to say is that the Inuits have
Yes.
a scientific process, even if they don't call it that. Like, and
Mm,
I'm not. I know that I sound like one of
No,
these
I feel what
blowhard
you mean.
Christians out here going like, everybody knows God. You know, everybody knows the laws of God. They just need to be taught them or whatever. No, it's not what I'm trying to say. What
No,
I'm trying to say is that the Inuits and all kinds of Native Americans and all kinds of
Yes.
Europeans and all kinds of Africans. Ultimately, we're all just Africans, right?
Mhm.
We just have this idea of trial and error.
Mhm. You're totally right.
Keep trying things and until it works.
Yes, you're completely correct. But the difference, that's totally correct. But the difference is between us and them in that instance is that we place that up here. It's up here. Like everything else is subservient to it. If you want to understand physical phenomena, that notion is what I'm talking about. We all have trial and error. Orangutans have trial and error. We place everything as subservient to it. And that's what leads us to telephones. That's what leads us to flying fast cars and all that. It's the notion that it is in some, it's the notion as if it's in an Archimedean position. It's the pressure to put everything else underneath it if you want to understand physical reality. I don't think it is truly an Archimedean position because it's in relation to something. If I want to understand physical phenomena before my eyes, therefore this is the position you should look at it from. So I don't think it's perfectly Archimedean because I'm not trying to say it's for all of everything everywhere all at the same time. I'm not going to try to solve the trolley problem using it. But I will say if I want to understand this in front of me, everything else is subservient to it. You can't just be Aristotle and try to imagine your way out of a problem. You're going to have to trial and error it. You're going
I
and
guess
that is the better way. And that is what we're teaching the Inuit. That's what happens across the world. That is the Western chauvinism, the idea that it is
I
dominating.
guess.
And
But
that's what I mean.
But so I guess to sum up what I'm trying to say
Please.
is that I agree with Welsh in that we have to have multiple modalities of thought rather than this superiority, complex
right.
that he's talking about. We can all agree on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what I don't agree with is this general air, this general sentiment, this kind of paraphrase that I'm trying to suggest here, that like all modalities are equally valid. Because they're not. They're just not.
So, to advocate his position a little bit better, he does say that it's all contextual. And so you could say that context is what are you aiming for
Yep.
in a lot of
Right.
cases, or what are you trying to measure and by what measure?
Yeah, no, that's completely fair, Michael. For example, we've literally said it on this podcast before. The face value point of religion, looking at it from an outside perspective, is to be pro deity, right? It's not pro human; it's pro deity,
Mhm.
and you can see that in the way that it hurts people because it is not pro human; it's pro
Right.
deity.
Right. I this does not feel like an end of an episode. It feels like we're at the halfway point, but I am afraid we're at an hour and a half, so we might want to wrap up.
Sure.
Yeah, I was.
So-
There was so much trying to leap out of my head as soon as you started saying, but we hold that here above all these other paradigms, and I started going, oh my God, in the United States, we value production more than anything else, and that's why everything's going to shit because we can't put people's needs above our own
we need-
yearning for production.
Exactly. So how we should end
It's
how we
paperclip
should end is to
optimization.
say, don't read the paper if you don't want to, but take it from us if you trust us, right? Adopt multiple modalities of thought to take care of each other, right? In other words, like you're just not going to be able to use science to solve your ethical dilemmas. You're not going to be able to, and you need to grow up and figure that out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Very
Honestly, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
There we are. All right, just like that, we have ourselves a stellar ending. Ladies, gentlemen, everyone, I wish you a humble, wonderful afternoon, rest of your morning, if it's morning when you see this. Hope to see you on episode 35 next week. Topic is forthcoming. We shall find out. Did you hate this episode? Do you think this was the best one so far? Tell us down in the comments down below. All that kind of fun stuff.
Special thanks to Michael.
Special thanks to Michael. 100% special thanks to Michael. What a wonderful episode. And with that, I bid you adieu.